Welcome to AI at Work. I'm Kevin Williams of Ascend AI. We help companies and their leaders make sense of the AI chaos and find real solutions. I'm in the tools every day, doing it out loud, including the stuff that breaks. Not the headlines, not the latest model, what actually works. Hey, we're back at AI at Work, and I have my friend Matt Graham from Rapid Dev with us again. How's it going, Matt?
I'm doing great, man. I'm so excited for this today, Kevin. I got tons of questions. I'm really pumped for our conversation today.
Awesome. So I happen to know, Matt, that you've worked your way back to Europe for this time an internal hackathon, right, with your team?
Yeah, it's a little bit different. It's a hacker house. So
Okay.
hackathon is usually you're trying to get the team to like understand some new technology, and we can talk all about that too. But this one is a hacker house where we got some hard technical problems that we're trying to solve. We got our best people in the room, locked in an Airbnb. It's a little uncomfortable, but like that's the best. We're all tied to our desks, typing away. And we just got done doing one of these in Istanbul 2 weeks ago. We got so much done, and we got more done in 2 weeks than we did 2 months. And so we decided to do one more this month together in another country in Europe. So
So
very excited.
some of our listeners may not be familiar with this idea. I've done this sort of thing in the past, both with collaborators and internal staff. But the idea is that, you're going to rent a house, you're going to put yourself in close proximity with core people of your team. So basically, there's no escape. And everybody is very, very focused on solving some problems. And of course, you're solving problems with artificial intelligence. So what does that look like in terms of an agenda? And, how can our listeners think about a hacker house or a hackathon, however you want
Hackathon.
to phrase it, and sort of what's the run of show? How long do these things go? What's sort of your expected output? Who's there, etc.
Yeah. So a lot of things here. Tell me when you want me to shut up, Kevin. So when I think hacker house, I'm thinking we have a hard business problem that we need to solve, and we need to get a variety of different views in the room and people that are really, within the top 10% of performance at our company. And so, we get together. We honestly barely even left the Airbnb. We only got like a few groceries. We didn't even go out to eat. We didn't see any of the sites. But you want a variety of perspectives because these are tough problems, right? When you're on a call on Zoom trying to solve a tough problem, everyone's like, okay, yeah, I'll think about it. Then we all hang up and don't think about it. When you're in a house in an Airbnb, everyone's like, how about this? How about that? We actually put our hands on the keyboard and we start trying it. Let's go look this up. Let's try this. Okay. A few hours later, none of that worked. Let's try a different angle, right? And we're just all super focused and intense. Focused means you're blocking out other tasks, other noise. Intense means you're like staying up until literally 4 a.m. I was just talking to one of my buddies who was with us. He's like, yeah, I remember I was up until 4 a.m. staying up just because he was so into the problem we were trying to solve, like in that flow state. So yeah, I think it's really good to get your top people in person, locked in a room when you have a hard business problem to solve, especially when it comes to AI, because none of this stuff is like out of the box. Like, I mean, there's a lot of hype around it. Everyone's like, oh, it's so easy. You just type this and prompt it and bam, you got it all ready to go. It's not like that. Once you get into the weeds and once you actually try to build something production ready, that's going to produce business value. And so you got to get the team together. You got to get them in the same room and figure it out all together.
So what's the composition of the team? Is it a mix of like creative, technical,
Exactly.
how many people do you have crammed into this place?
Yeah, so we only brought 8. So we had like 2 of our top developers, one of our most technical project managers or product managers, who can do the technical speak and the actual business speak. Then we had 2 sales reps because they understand the customer need, they understand what the customer actually wants. And then we had someone from the creative team as well, who's just kind of thinking outside of the box and like totally different angles and thinks totally different from the rest of us, and then myself as well.
All right. And how often do you do these? I mean, I know you did one like just
Usually
2
we
weeks
do.
ago, but
Yeah. Usually we do like one once a year. Like, what's our biggest lever you can pull in your business that's really going to 10x you? This year, like AI is just moving so fast. There's so many big levers you can be pulling. And again, we made so much progress quickly. I said, let's keep the momentum going. Let's do one more. I don't think we need another one after this for a while. but let's just all get back. We changed the crew a little bit slightly so we get some different perspectives, not with some new problems we got to solve. Get them in the room, and we're doing it again.
So, from my own perspective, having done this both internally and externally, for those of you who are running like SMBs, you have just a few staff and you're not quite sure what this looks like. Embracing your broader community, be you in direct consumer or you're in fashion or whatever it is, having kind of a peer group that you can do this with can be really challenging as well because you can bring different perspectives from different industries and different approaches. But the format is still pretty much the same, except it's less executional. It's more like aspirational and idea oriented when you're working with collaborators. The other is, big companies tend to get a little bit precious about this. I know that sounds awful, but they want to do a retreat somewhere and then they like do all of these other activities and things. And I do like the idea of having like defined breaks where like we don't work during dinner. Like we're all going to have like a really nice dinner and we're going to leave the house because leaving the house for a few minutes can be really healthy and it inspires like cross pollination of ideas. And then coming back on the other side can be really helpful. But it seems pretty obvious, and most companies don't do this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think another spin on this is even if you're not trying to get a bunch of people in the room to solve your biggest business problem, there's also a lot of value of just getting some group of people in the room so that they can learn these tools. Like a lot of businesses aren't at the cutting edge of everything that's happening, and they just need to kind of level up their employees in terms of like, hey, I'm the CEO. I need everyone embracing AI. I myself, as the CEO, don't know exactly what that means, but we're all going to figure that out together. So here we go. Let's design a quick hackathon together. It's not really going to produce like, a particular business outcome, but what it's going to do is get us all hands on keyboards, experiencing these tools, understanding, getting the creative genius flowing, and we'll start to see like how all of us can be using these tools individually in our own individual workflows, because a lot of these tools actually are really good for individuals. They maybe break down when you try to orchestrate a bunch of things together to produce a bigger business outcome, and that's where it starts to get more complicated. But individuals in your companies need to be embracing these tools, and you as the leader can have some influence getting them in the room to get them over that initial hump of fear or anxiety, or just not knowing even where to start.
So that's actually a perfect segue to my last week. I was in Los Angeles and I was hired by a pretty high end fashion brand by the founder, who's the creative genius, and her husband, who's the CEO. And they actually bought 2 days of my time. And they were so serious about going from 0 to probably 2 or 3 on the scale that they cleared their schedules entirely. And these are people who were in Milan the night before and they're bouncing all over the place. But they just realized that they absolutely had to make the space to do this. And we sat down at their dining room table for 2 days and worked them through from, I mean, honestly, literally zero. Like, we need to get the chatbot
Or have they
installed.
ever opened they'd
I
never
mean,
opened ChatGPT, or, like,
no.
opened it but not used it? Oh, wow! Whew.
No. So, I
All
mean,
you
that's
CEOs
extreme,
listening
right?
to this show, you're not out of the game yet, right? Like, there's
Yeah,
still
exactly.
plenty
That's
of
it.
people who have no idea.
There are plenty of people like, and I'm not recriminating here. Like, they're a very successful business. They don't need AI to drive their business forward, but they're recognizing the opportunity and they're recognizing the importance of leaning in and understanding that they don't really have the time. And this is something that we hear all the time. Is you'll approach a busy executive and you'll say, "Hey, we can save you all of this time," and the response ends up being something along the lines of, "I just don't have time to figure out how to save myself time." And it's just like,
Mhm.
you need to slow down a little bit. You need to make space such that you as a leader understand the technology. And it does start with the basics. It does start with being able to use a chatbot, being able to prompt really efficiently, and then understanding some of the like agentic harness features that are built right into the platforms. So by the time we left, they went from knowing very, very little to having chiefs of staff that were managing their schedule and allowed the founder in particular, who really doesn't want to check email, certainly doesn't want to get into a project management tool. Like, she wants to be able to just basically talk into her phone and have the phone communicate the missives to the team. And now that's all in place. So now the flywheel is starting to turn, and we'll start working with the broader staff. And in an industry fashion that is kind of lagging behind technologically, this is a brand that in 6 months or 12 months will definitely be pulling ahead.
So Kevin, real quick, so do you 2 days, these
Yeah.
big executives run a big company, they fly you into LA, you sit at their dining room table, you talk to the, that's a lot of pressure. They're paying you a lot of money and you're probably like, I got to make sure I produce a lot of value here for these folks. Just like, you want to do a good job. I know you do. So like, how do you structure that? Is it like presentations? Is it like you plug into their giant TV and like show off your screen? Like, and how do you also balance like the hype versus reality? Like I think it's especially in the creatives world where like folks, I've seen this all the time, their eyes just light up once they start seeing this stuff and they're like,
Hmm.
everything's possible. Okay, everyone go on holiday for a full week. We're going to let agents run the entire company. How do you kind of like dial it back to reality? And also just the format of your presentation, how you approach it.
So, it's an interesting question. And I think it's a good takeaway for people who are doing this internally, because I know we have listeners who are basically in the seat of being like the AI czar in their organization. And maybe they don't have the executive authority to make things happen. So they're trying to influence things. I think I'm an interesting critter in that, although I run a training business and we do a lot of training, I'm more of a coach. So if you're going to bring me in, you're bringing me in as an experienced CEO and an operator, and I'm going to be able to collaborate with you one on one as sort of a peer to show you how I run my business. And I tend to overshare sometimes. So I have to be a little bit careful about what I'm bringing up on my screen, because it's not canned. I'm literally showing like how I run my own day, how I start my own day with a morning prompt that comes out of a snippet from Whisperflow. So I literally use Whisperflow, the dictation tool in Claude, and say paste morning briefing, and that triggers a whole bunch of other stuff that happens in my day. And I think that makes it pretty accessible. But in general, I hate to say this because I don't love to scare people, but these days I start with risk. Particularly with high net worth people, and executives. Like, the risk is real out there as far as these new models and exploits and things like that, such that people understand how that looks. So making sure that their passwords are all situated and such. And then I tend to go into a phase of, where does AI appear? So people don't really think about this too much, but even just taking Claude appears in at least 5 places. So Claude's just the chat bot that you use online, right? Claude also appears in the browser such that you can interact with it. You have Claude Design to do more advanced either coding or qualitative topics. You have the phone, right? And
Mhm.
you have Claude Desktop, which allows you to do automations and co-work and all of these other pieces. And I don't count very well, because the sixth is increasingly across the Microsoft universe. I've never been a huge Microsoft fan. I don't know a lot of startup people who are huge fans of like getting into bed with Microsoft, but Microsoft plus Claude are leaps and bounds ahead of Copilot. And the ability to integrate Claude in particular across Microsoft apps is a huge eye opener. Like, if you're a CEO, you're this client, that's a huge deal for you, because a lot of your job is information synthesis, right? And being able to integrate the LLMs across these systems. From there, we usually go into advanced prompting. We teach CRIT, context, role, interview, and task. Go into depth on that at some other time. And after then, it's about solving some problems. So I sat down with them, I did the education, and then I understood what their actual workflows look like. And then I scuttled back to my hotel, and I spent the rest of the evening basically designing what a perfect agent would look like for them, and then taught them how to use it. So it's just agent version one for
Mhm.
them, but walking them through, how do you connect to Slack? How do you put a scheduled task together in Cowork that can do this? Where does the prompt go? How do you use Whisperflow and create a snippet such that you can talk about these things? So by the time I left, everybody was exhausted. They looked like limp noodles by the time
Yeah.
I left. They have all the tools they need to start actually rolling.
Yeah, so it sounds like what I'm hearing is like, would you say it's accurate to say there's a lot of individual use cases that you're trying to inspire them with and get them up to speed on versus, hey, we're coming in, we're doing a business, let's look at the business, understand what the workflows are, what are the major levers in your industry in this business that you run, and then let's see where AI can be useful. It's a little bit maybe some of that, but a lot of like, hey, this is how we're going to set you up individually, get your hands on the keyboard, start using this, then invite me back, or eventually we'll reach phase two of your journey, which is we'll start thinking about how to either get your employees to use these tools or start thinking about how the business more broadly can be leveraging AI.
I think that's right on. Because there is no just set approach. Like, okay, if you have one Gmail account and you're connected to, straightforward like CRMs or something like that, it's pretty easy to advise people. But it turns out the real world is really complicated. And if you're dealing with Microsoft in particular, there are hoops you have to jump through to be able to make the agentic harnesses work with them. And I think to myself, I live and breathe this stuff, and it's still a bit of a fiddly challenge for me to connect all of these different pieces. Unless you're really an enthusiast, it's
Mhm.
understandable that people are really frustrated and they're not really embracing the sorts of things that guys like us are leaning into, because it's technically still a little bit challenging. Not technical as in, oh, I have to get in
Yeah.
Claude Code and I have to build this or whatever, but it's just a different approach and people aren't quite used to it yet. And then when you translate that into like corporate trainings, when we do bigger corporate trainings, you definitely have to move pretty slowly and within the kind of guardrails of the tech that the organization offers, and give people time to like experiment and give them little adventures. I love giving people adventures. Again, this
Side
founder,
quest.
yeah, side quests, like side quests, yes. Um, in her case, she's a gardener on the side. And showing her how to use Claude and image recognition in Claude, such that she could figure out like what was going on with her dahlias in the yard. Like, she was so excited about that, and that excitement, it kind of goes back to your to the hacker house idea, that excitement, she's going to use image recognition for doing gardening, which is going to give her the reps of understanding like sort of the limits of the technology. And then probably she's going to start using it for fabrics and like other things that are more tied to her world. But the entry point was running around in her backyard, like photographing flowers.
That's so funny. So it's interesting. Like everyone's got to get used to the UX, right? The UI, like and like you said, it's not technically complicated, but there's a million different things you hook together and you log in here, you log in there, and then you see different interfaces for all these and you need to figure out where to click. So that can be a little nerve wracking for some people. And then what the journey I've seen is, the CDO or some sort of part of the leadership team is interested. You sit down, you help them get up to speed, get them using these tools. They start to understand the use cases. Start to understand the interfaces. They become more proficient with it themselves. Then they want to get their employees to use it. So they maybe run a hackathon or they do some sort of workshops or training or seminars with folks like ourselves or yourselves. And then after that, then maybe they're really becoming more AI enthusiasts and starting to build, like maybe they have some citizen developers, but they want to have, something more robust or more professionally built. So it feels like there's a bit of a journey there that a lot of companies are going on, starting from the top, then the employees learning, and then actually leveraging these tools in more complex systems in more coordinated fashions.
I love that term, citizen developer. I'm going to steal that for sure. That's a good idea because we're that's a lot of our end goal is to identify those bright points of light, and they often
Yeah.
aren't within the CTO stack. They're a salesperson who happens to have like a knack for
Mhm.
solution finding, and they probably wouldn't make a great developer, but they understand what the product needs to look like. I'll say that it's hard. It's really, really hard to graduate from, okay, we're all using this stuff and sort of at a basic level, we're building GPTs, we have some repeatable processes. Maybe we're bridging into agentic harnesses. This is all very, very new, obviously. Over in the last 3 or 4 months, a lot of this has become more plausible for organizations, but they're still a little bit stuck with how they build the thing, particularly since, as we talked about in the last episode, a lot of this stuff is still pretty fragile. So
Mhm.
having people internally building sort of like disposable products that you can use for like internal whatever the heck it is, that's great. But when you start trying to build like service features and things like that, people get out of their depth relatively quickly. And my goal is to teach people how to fish, but at the end of the day, we run our embedded AI offices in organizations specifically because the organization is doing its thing and it can't necessarily slow down to solve the problems that we can solve out of the box.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's a great opportunity for people like us, but I'm being authentic in that I really do want to see organizations grow that capacity over time. But at the moment, it's very early days. And I would say too often, I'm seeing hesitant, but too often I see too much being layered into a CTO vertical, and then like all of the inputs and the needs go into the top of the CTO vertical into traditional planning, budgeting and processes, which that's what organizations do, but there's so many opportunities that sit at the side that would have rapid ROI, but the individual ROI of X project, like, oh, it's going to save us $150,000 a year. And the CTO's office says, oh, that's great, but we're working on these things that are going to save us $3 million a year. Well,
Mhm.
that person, that salesperson who came up with the $150,000 idea, they get it. It's going to make their life better. It's going to improve their P&L, but they can't actually do it, and they can't actually do it themselves. So they're sort of stuck, and that's where these forward deployed teams like your teams or my teams come in.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's not just a tech problem and it's not just like the tools are too complicated for the individual. There's a lot of actually organizational momentum or friction or, like that salesperson, he needs to access data from different parts of the organization. He's not a project manager. He's never quarterbacked a large project that goes outside of his domain of expertise. The CTO doesn't really understand the problem that the salesperson has. So if you leave it to the CTO, he's not actually talking to the customer or the client or figuring out the actual problem that's trying to be solved internally. So there is not just a tech problem. And that's what I would caution like a lot of CEOs to think about when they think about building something bigger or trying to empower their team, but they should recognize that, larger companies have digital transformation offices that have like very long SOPs and processes for change management, cultural changes that are going to happen, personnel habits that need to change, and then just all the complex coordination that needs to happen across departments, across different teams to actually make it work. So as the technology gets easier, that is not going to go away, right? And for smaller organizations that haven't dealt with those more complex implementations, they probably don't have an appreciation for how complicated the human part is for all this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it's I like to say that as an organization, if we have free reign, we will go in and we will break an organization chart. And that's
Yeah.
we're invited to do so, but guess what? The org chart has opinions about that. So the org chart is made up of people and budgets and egos and all of these other things. And it's super challenging. So a lot of this is actually leadership positioning around, how do we think about this? How's the human element applied in the mix? How do we empower people when, where, and how? What is our tolerance for risk? The closer to a regulatory industry you sit, the tighter you're going to be on a lot of this stuff. But it's super challenging for sure. Whereas if you're a 20-person company and you can throw down with five of your top people and just figure it out and bully your way through, it gives you a lot more flexibility.
Totally. So, Kevin, I'm going to switch gears here for a second. You said something before the show started here about loops and what you were working on this weekend. I'm really excited to kind of shift gears into that if you'll let me, because I was just listening to a podcast. It wasn't a podcast; it's like a YouTube episode. It was I forgot the guy's name, but the person who actually invented Claude Code at Anthropic, and he was talking about how code is solved with AI, and I thought that was super interesting. And he started talking about the loops feature and how you set the outcome or the goal of what you want to achieve and less about like the individual task layer. So I think a lot of our listeners probably are focused on like, how can I get AI to do this one task or like a small sequence of tasks, which we'll call workflow. But I think the big unlock that's coming is set the goal or the output that you want to achieve and then have it like recursively loop and iterate and try to achieve that until it does. So what you learned, tell me everything. I'm really excited about this.
So we talked about goals as a primitive about a month ago, around about, and you know, if you have just been painting by numbers, if you've been listening to this show and you've downloaded Claude Code and you've been experimenting and okay, you've got your Supabase and you've got Vercel and you're launching things, you're probably getting a little bit frustrated in that Claude Code is pretty needy. It has a lot of questions. It's conservative for very good reasons. If you've built it in the right way, it's going to constantly catch errors, etc. But it takes like care and feeding as far as giving it access or giving it permissions to do things that in a lot of cases you're not going to really understand because you're not super technical, right? But at the end of the day, any workflow is based on a trigger, something is happening, right? And you have an output at the end of the day. And you can spend a lot of time fussing over the intermediate steps between them, or you can orient the system more on what the output is supposed to look like. And this is actually a different skill set to understand what that output is supposed to be. And people who are good at scope are really good at understanding outputs, right? So by using a command that is /goal in Claude Code, you can dictate what it's supposed to look like at the end. And it's not like you're writing the /goal. I typically would use Claude to help me write a prompt that's based on the goal that I need for getting it done. And it will loop through continuously, like trying to iron out its own issues, and it can run for hours at a time. This is where you hear the the elite of vibe coding are always talking about how they have 7 agents going at once. This is kind of a lightweight version of that, but for most sort of amateur vibe coders, it's really eye opening to see how those loops work. And if you've connected it to your phone, so I don't think we've ever mentioned this here. If you were to, I don't want to be like too totally Claude centric because a lot of this stuff can be done in GPT as well. But I happen to be I'm a Claude user. So in Claude, in your app, there's a code section in there. And in Claude Desktop, if you /remote control, it's going to then send the process to your phone, so you can leave. You could go to the gym. I happen to know that you're a big walking desk guy. We've had many calls on walking desks, but you can pick up your phone and you can see the process that's going on to see if it's gone awry. And with a goal, those might run for a really long.
Yeah, it's super interesting. So what are some of like the pitfalls you saw like trying to set the goal? Did it just get stuck for hours? Because that's, one fear that I have is it's just burning through tokens. It's a nice trick for Claude to just eat up your wallet real quick. You walk away and they didn't actually accomplish the goal 10 hours later.
Well, to be clear, internally, most of the development that I'm doing fits well under a $200 max plan. I'm patient enough that I don't necessarily need to bust into that extra usage. So, yes, it's true that you can burn through an entire session, but it can make a lot of forward progress in that respect. And then, it will have stalled out because it either ran out of tokens or it just, you have a session period of use and you can just say continue and it'll keep going. I would say that it does take a little bit of discipline. We have to run the gambit in this show between opening people's eyes to the art of the possible and like kind of being overwhelming and technical. And I'm trying not to be technical, but you also have skills, which we've talked about at various times in the show, that do functions. So I have a skill that one of my team members built called naysayer, and what naysayer is doing is it's looking for code issues, and unless it scores 8 out of 10 on naysayer, so it's going through a process where it's looking for code iterations, it can't pass to the next step. So when you run a / goal, it's trying to go do steps A, B, and C, but A has its own loops. So basically, A won't finish under the naysayer until it passes its quality controls, and then it passes to B, and then it passes to C. Previously, I would have been able to done A. I would have been able to do it with naysayer and feel pretty good about it. But now I feel pretty confident of passing A to B to C, but only because I have those controls under the hood. If you run a goal that's like, hey, build me this cool app that does all of these things, I'm going to lunch, like you might get something at the other end, but it might also have a ton of issues. So there's sort of a caveat there. But beyond that, I think my issues come down to sometimes it can be overcautious, and sometimes it can be overcautious about things that probably don't matter in the scope. But yeah, no, it's been super eye opening as just kind of a liberator. Again, I do feel like that guy sometimes who has his thumb in the laptop before, like I'm walking around the house so that Claude doesn't turn off. But now I have it on my phone so I can legitimately like go off and do something else. Often my prompt will be, I need to go to the gym. Like by the time I'm back, / goal, have all this stuff done.
So are you running multiple ones in parallel? Are you, so are some of our developers will have this running, this running, this running, and they're bouncing between, different goals or different loops that are running at once as they build out different modules, perhaps? Have you gone doing that, or are you just kind of just focus over the weekend? And yeah, what was it this weekend you were working on? I can't quite remember.
So this weekend, so I have a commercial product called LeadWorks, and LeadWorks is a dynamic lead magnet tool that like it gathers very precise information about leads that come in and then sends out a custom nurture emails at the other end. And it's really cool. It's like, as a former marketer, it's like the lead magnet that I always wanted myself. And now I have the opportunity to build it, but it is a touch of a side quest. So I have to like keep it on my weekends.
Mhm.
And it's an alpha, and there are a lot of leads that are cranking through it, and it's an alpha, so customers are coming and they're saying, hey, it'd be really great if we had this feature or that feature, or there's this bug. But now that we're at the 95% layer, it's really, really scary because it's out there in the live. Customers are depending on it. Like now I'm being tested as far as the infrastructure that I've built, as far as whether or not it's going to carry me through or not. So when I'm doing things like goals, my goals get pretty elaborate such that they have to reference back to things that it can't touch. So, I never want to mess with live customer products that are out there. So I have to work on my goals such that we get to the desired outcome, but the process, the timing definitely slows down. So things that, I would have kind of flown through in the first 80% of development, now I'm going at a snail's pace because I just can't afford to break anything.
Mm.
And I think that's a very common feeling among people who are building these tools. And it's also a differentiator that if you're going to be disciplined about it and you're going to build something for scale, that's entirely different from building a little app that you're going to use like once and toss away.
Yeah, very different from building an internal tool versus external tool as well. Like if you're building anything that's going to touch customers, vendors, suppliers, you got to be much more careful with that than if you're just building something for a marketing department internally, a sales department internally. They'll be more forgiving than your customers for sure.
Yeah. So the other part of goals that we were talking about earlier today that I think is really interesting and I don't think has been particularly well covered or particularly understood is the fact that this is not restricted to code. Anthropic did itself a disservice by calling Claude Code Claude Code. It is much more than code. It is first applied to code and product development and building things under the hood. But the same technologies that were used in Claude Code can be used for qualitative tasks and development. And what I am starting to experiment with, and I would encourage audience to experiment with this as well, are using these same recursive loops, the goal loops within Claude Code to work on qualitative outputs. So maybe it's a marketing plan or a strategic plan or whatever it is. The skilled LLM operator today is likely to go to Claude or to go to GPT. They're likely to establish context, the background, everything they need to do the task. They're going to pull in documents. They're going to do this thing. And they're going to say, I want the best business plan ever. And they're going to hit submit. And their chatbot of choice is going to go off and it's going to chew on it. And it's going to probably give a pretty good document, right? At the end of the day. Well, now think about this goal function in that respect, that there's a bunch of iteration that could go into that. So imagine having like steelman perspectives that look at it and harden the arguments and loop back over itself such that it's not a 20-minute process, it's more like an hour or a 2-hour process as it's looking at all the permutations of the product and making sure that it actually matches what you're doing on the outside. Um, but that's where we're headed as far as goal oriented prompting and outputs. And step one or station one was coding of like, oh, we can build parts of an app. And then later in that station was, oh, wow, we can build most of an app. And the app has these features. And now you're starting to look at knowledge work or financial analysis or other things that aren't code, but it's using the same sort of logic.
Yeah, that recursive nature, the loop nature, that's exactly what that the founder of Claude Code, or the inventor, I guess you could say, was talking about. Something that was interesting working with my team just a few hours ago was not only looping it on itself, but looping it to other models to check it, like that naysayer concept you were saying. So in a particular thing we're working on today, we had 5 different models that we were bouncing it between to double check, like, who of our 5 models. First, we'll start with 2. If the 2 models agree, then proceed. If there's a disagreement between the 2 models, then go to the next 3 models and see if those 3 agree or disagree. And depending on, your confidence that you want to have, you can set it to go back or to move forward, depending on maybe one of the 2 disagrees, but the other 2 do. So, it's again, we've talked about token cost and prices for all this stuff. So you got to be careful. But there are a lot of cheaper open source models out there that make this possible if you want to have like extra confidence with particular types of loops that you may be running in your process. Again, that's probably too advanced for this crowd, but just something that folks can kind of keep in mind. But either way, all this stuff is getting better and better. Cost is going down. It may not feel like that with tokens, but it will come down. And the cost of will come down not because of the token cost, but because of it'll get it right with less loops, right?
Yes. Yes. We call it a minority report, like the Tom Cruise movie, like being able to get a consensus among models, but it can be really expensive. So the art of this is not just brute forcing the output. The
Mhm.
art is finding what is the lowest common denominator model that you can use for the most cost effective price at whatever volume you're operating to get the highest level of output out the other door. And that was a gut check, what we just said, for like, the 500 people who are listening who are in this are like, oh, I'm just using Claude. And it is different. You can't just toss in GPT instead of Claude. They have slightly different prompt logic as far as making it work. So that idea of looking at results is great. But if the last couple of weeks in the news cycle with Anthropic in trouble with the government because of Fable and things like that, this is a real problem in that between Anthropic's instability, like it goes down all the time. It's completely nuts how often it goes down. Um, and the fact that the government can just turn it off. Like, if you've just built your business on top of Anthropic, you have a risk, whether you appreciate it or not. I mean, you have a risk if you've built it on GPT, which is what lends itself to this conversation about open source. And I really want to put a giant asterisk next to that, because although you and I could easily like BS our way through, going to Hugging Face and downloading a model and like setting it up and provisioning it and whatever, and thumbs up, great, now we have an open source model and it's only charging us process. Well, you've just added all this extra infrastructure. You either have like real processors that are running, which can cost tens of thousands of dollars, like locally, or you're running cloud infrastructure of some kind, which, believe me, Jeff Bezos needs a new settee for his yacht. So he's going to charge you what he's going to charge you to do that, right? And these things change all the time. They need care and they need feeding. And look around your office.
Mhm.
Do you have a bunch of network engineers around? I bet you don't. So we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, that the right answer for an organization at a certain level of maturity is to start leaning into open source models just as a fallback in case that something goes awry elsewhere. But it's not simple or easy to do that. On the other side, the easier approaches are through like routers, like Open Router. So you can build Open Router right into whatever you're building, and it can do model selection for you. So you can have a primary model and you can have a fallback model, such that if there is instability in the app, you can do that. But that doesn't necessarily help you I've been saying this for years. At some point, something bad is going to happen here. Like, it hasn't really yet, but like, we're at the edge of kind of scary with some of these models, and a bad actor will do something that involves infrastructure, security, a dam, like whatever. And all of a sudden there's going to be like a snapback, and you could see all of your models just basically either temporarily or permanently just getting turned off. And ask yourself, have I built a business that can survive that? Like, I'm loving it. I'm so efficient. I have one person who's running all of these operations, and there are 1,000 things that are happening. What if somebody just like took your toy away?
Yeah, it's a little scary. I still think it's less than 5% chance. Like, I think it's still
Yeah.
worth diving in and going forward, but it's something to be aware of, definitely. Another thing that was interesting today is, as we run our system, we create a database of all prior runs that ran successfully with the correct outcome, and we keep that database so that if we do need to switch to model, or we want to check if, like, the flash or the flash model or the deep research model is better or worse, or whatever the efficacy of different versions of the same model are, we have a database of set outcomes that we know it should produce. So, okay, we have a set of 1,000 data points. Go ahead, run that as a simulation. Did the efficacy get better because we ran a more higher end model, or a more expensive model, or we just used a more basic model, or we used a totally different model? And we know, okay, great, it got exactly 997 of them correct, right? So this is pretty high efficacy, something like that.
So first reaction is awesome. That's great. That's what we do with industries that are in adjacent to regulations, because you have to have traceability, you have to have explainability. So what you just built from a quality perspective also can be applied in terms of a liability or a regulatory compliance perspective. So that's great. But now roll back earlier in the conversation where we're talking about that gap between the guy in sales who's trying to solve some little thing and the infrastructure infrastructure that's required to do model switching, prompt tracking, improvements, like no chance that this guy is going to have that skill set. And frankly, if you're in a semi-technical organization, like, take the fashion house I was working with, like, yeah, they have some web developers and such. They don't have devs. They don't have like the ability to actually build those extra pieces. So it gets kind of aspirational in a hurry to do these like really full featured functions without some professional help. And you really can't hire it right now either because it's all so fresh. Like you see universities coming out with, technical AI, like, et cetera. And that will those people will matriculate and they'll be on the market in a few years and you'll be able to start hiring for those. But we're in the awkward middle here where you just quickly get out of your depth. Yeah, well, awkward. Yeah, awkward beginning for sure. Yeah, yeah, and I hope that's clear. I hope that's clear that this is not this isn't even easy for us. Like it just changes so fast, and we live and breathe this stuff. So being able to roll with whatever that technological change is sort of the gig that we signed up for. But it's daunting for tech verticals that have had static processes for a long time, and you could totally sympathize and understand why a CIO or a CTO would just be like tearing their hair out as far as figuring this stuff out. All right. Hey, Matt. Yeah, fun as always. I hope that your hacker house yields the things that you need it to yield. I think that's a takeaway today. Like if you want to jumpstart your action, you do need to develop that literacy. You need to get people equipped with the right tools. You need to get a familiarity around it, and then you need to have good problems to solve that are something that are tangible and there's something that are doable, and get people out of their normal context, get them focused on it, lean in, and put a really strict time limit on it. That this is what we're expecting on the other end. And honestly, what better way to learn than to dive in and do it? And it might end up flaming garbage at the other end, but I guarantee that it'll be part of the journey that that allows you to start building things that are better. And so, yeah, Matt, thanks for being on again. Matt's team is absolutely fantastic, and they're on the cutting edge of this. He's at rapiddev.ai, rapiddev.com. All of those domains work. Excellent. We have all of the things. But great talking to you, and enjoy your time in Europe. Thanks for listening. Questions for the show? Email me directly at kevin@ascendlabs.ai. At Ascend AI, we embed forward-deployed AI offices inside companies to help them cut through the chaos. I also work privately with a few select leaders, one-on-one, guiding them through a landscape that keeps shifting. Want a fast read on your biggest AI opportunities? Take our free AI Opportunity Analyzer at assessments.ascendlabs.ai. Catch you next time.